The rain came down in thick sheets, blurring the world into a grey smear as Jordan Mitchell trudged home from school, his backpack sagging under the weight of soggy textbooks and loose papers. Water streamed from the frayed edges of his hood, and each step made a squelching sound as his sneakers sank into the mud that lined the cracked sidewalks. It was one of those storms that made the day feel like it never really began, dark and cold, with a kind of chill that settled deep in your clothes. Jordan kept his head down, more focused on getting home than anything else, until he reached the intersection near his neighborhood. That's when he saw her. An elderly woman stood at the corner, gripping a plastic grocery bag that looked like it might tear at any second. Her coat was thin and clung to her frail frame, her hair plastered to her scalp in dripping white strands. She had no umbrella, no protection from the downpour, and her outstretched hand trembled as she stepped hesitantly toward the crosswalk. Cars surged past in waves, drivers honking, tires hissing over wet asphalt. People passed without looking, heads down, earbuds in, collars up. She was almost invisible in the chaos, swallowed by the blur of the city's indifference. Jordan slowed, torn between instinct and hesitation. He glanced at the crowd around him. No one was stopping. No one even seemed to notice. His heart thudded, harder, a rhythm louder than the rain. Then he took a breath and darted forward. He reached her side just as she stepped back from a speeding taxi. "Here," he said, holding his umbrella over her. "Let me help." She looked up at him, startled, and he saw how tired her eyes were, how scared. "Oh," she murmured, voice barely audible through the rain. "Thank you, dear." He took the grocery bag from her hands. It was heavier than it looked. Dan gently guided her across the street, shielding her with his too small umbrella as best he could. Drivers glanced at them. A few people on the sidewalk slowed to watch, but Jordan focused only on the slow, careful steps of the woman beside him. When they finally reached the other side, she turned to him, her eyes glistening with something more than just rain. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Jordan," he said quietly, pushing wet hair from his eyes. She nodded slowly, the corners of her mouth lifting in a tremulous smile. "You're going to do something special one day, Jordan." He blinked, caught off guard, and managed a small, awkward smile. "I just didn't want you to fall." She reached out and patted his hand, then turned and continued down the sidewalk, the bag swinging gently at her side. Jordan watched her go, the rain lightening to a drizzle around him. He never expected to see her again. At 26, Jordan Mitchell sat stiffly in the plush leather chair outside the gleaming glass conference room, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, fingertips cold despite the expensive suit he could barely afford to have dry-cleaned. The office buzzed with quiet efficiency, sleek desks, polished floors, fast-talking associates who walked with purpose. He looked the part, his tie knotted neatly, hair trimmed sharp, his resume stacked with experience. But beneath the surface, he was unraveling. This interview wasn't just another opportunity, was the last card he had to play. 2 layoffs in 18 months had knocked the wind from his momentum, and the eviction notice still felt fresh. For the past 6 weeks, he'd been crashing on his cousin Travis's living room couch, his few remaining belongings crammed into a duffel bag that sat under the coffee table like an unspoken reminder of failure. He took a breath, deep and quiet. His chest ached with the weight of too many silent battles. Jordan had clawed his way through life, no safety nets, no second chances. His father had walked out when he was 6, and his mother had spent the rest of her life trying to fill both roles. A nurse who worked double shifts, she was the kind of woman who never let bitterness settle, even when her own life offered little room to breathe. "Be kind," she'd told him often, her hand on his cheek, the scent of antiseptic always clinging to her uniform, even when no one's watching, especially then. She'd died before he graduated college, a heart attack in her sleep, after working 3 straight nights. He'd had no time to grieve. There were bills to pay, school loans to manage, and an impossible future to navigate. Now, a decade later, Jordan was smart, resourceful, and driven, but the exhaustion lived in his bones. Each rejection chipped away at him, not just financially, but emotionally. The analyst position at Creighton and Hewitt was the kind of role that could change everything: stability, respect, maybe even a future he could breathe in. He had the credentials, the experience, the drive. What he lacked lately was belief. Confidence had once been his armor. Now it felt like a thin coat in a storm. Travis didn't help either. His cousin meant well, but didn't understand. "You're chasing something that's not chasing you back," he'd said last night as they watched muted news on a flickering TV. "You got a degree. Sure, but maybe it's time to just take something, anything. Warehouse job. Sales doesn't have to be fancy. Just get real, man." But Jordan couldn't let go of the life he'd spent years building toward. Not yet. He remembered too clearly what it felt like to help his mum count coins for rent, to lie about needing new shoes so she wouldn't work extra. He remembered how it felt, soaked to the skin, holding an umbrella over a stranger in the rain and being told he'd do something special. Maybe that memory was naive. Maybe the world wasn't built for small kindnesses and quiet strength. But it was the foundation of who he was, and he'd be damned if he let go of that now. A receptionist called his name, and Jordan rose, smoothing his slacks with trembling hands. The weight of his future pressed heavy against his spine, but he lifted his chin and walked forward. Not because he was fearless, he wasn't, but because he'd learned long ago that fear didn't get the final word. Not when you've already lost so much. Not when there's still a chance, however small, to fight for more. Jordan arrived 40 minutes early, standing beneath the towering glass facade of Creighton and Hewitt, with the city reflected in its surface. Like a future he couldn't quite reach, he checked his reflection in the building's polished steel, trim tie straight, suit neat, breath steady. The answers he'd rehearsed all morning looped in his mind like a worn-out playlist. Why do you want to work here? What value do you bring to our team? Describe a time you failed. He'd gone over them on the train, in the lobby, even in the mirror above Travis's bathroom sink that morning while brushing his teeth with borrowed toothpaste. Everything had to be perfect today. This wasn't just a job, it was a lifeline. Inside the waiting room, sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching on sleek silver fixtures and the ticking of a minimalist clock. Jordan sat stiffly, legs crossed at the ankles, hands pressed flat against his thighs. He barely noticed the receptionist smile at him, or the way the air conditioning hummed gently overhead. He was too busy running through numbers, strategies, phrases he hoped would make him stand out. The door to the conference room finally opened, and footsteps approached. He stood quickly, heart pounding, then froze. The woman entering the room was elegant in a tailored navy suit, her silver hair pulled back neatly, glasses perched low on her nose. Her stride was confident, her gaze assessing, but kind. It was her, Mrs. Eleanor Brooks. Older now, more polished, but unmistakable. Jordan's breath caught in his throat. She didn't seem to recognize him. "Jordan Mitchell," she said, extending a hand. "Yes, yes, ma'am," he managed, shaking it. Her grip was firm, professional. "I'm Eleanor Brooks, head of talent acquisition." She gestured toward the conference room. "Let's begin." Jordan followed her inside, his legs moving on autopilot. The room was modern and spare. A long glass table, 3 chairs, a carafe of water no one would touch. Eleanor took her seat, opened a folder, and without delay, began asking questions. She was direct, focused, and sharp, pressing him for details on his consulting experience, his problem-solving methods, how he would approach a struggling client in a saturated market. Jordan did his best to respond with clarity, his voice steady, but his mind kept drifting, flashing back to that day in the rain, her groceries, the trembling way she'd held his hand. Still, he pushed through, citing data, strategy frameworks, project results. But every time she looked at him over the rim of her glasses, a strange tension twisted in his chest. Could she really not remember? Then, midway through the interview, she paused. Her eyes lingered on him, narrowing slightly. "Did you grow up near Eastern Avenue?" she asked suddenly. Jordan blinked. "Yes, I did." She tilted her head, her tone softer. "You helped me cross the street, years ago, in the rain." He stared at her, stunned. "That was you." Her smile was faint, but real. She leaned back in her chair, eyes never leaving his. "Well," she said, folding her hands in her lap, "let's talk." The tone of the interview shifted like a door opening. She asked fewer questions about numbers and more about people. What drove him, how he handled adversity, what he believed leadership really meant. Jordan spoke more freely now, the weight in his chest loosening, but the pressure didn't disappear. If anything, it grew heavier, because now this was real, not just about performance, but about a moment he'd barely remembered, and one she clearly hadn't forgotten. When the interview ended, she stood and extended her hand again. "Thank you, Jordan," she said, her voice unreadable. "We'll be in touch soon." He nodded, still dazed. "Thank you, Mrs. Brooks." She gave a small smile, curious, thoughtful, and turned away, her heels tapping softly on the floor as she left the room. Jordan stepped back into the lobby, his heart still thudding. The city beyond the glass shimmered in the afternoon light, and for the first time in weeks, something unfamiliar stirred in his chest. Not relief, not yet, but maybe hope. The days stretched thin and heavy after the interview, each one peeling back Jordan's resolve like paint left too long in the sun. At first, he held on to hope with a quiet desperation, checking his phone every hour, refreshing his inbox even more. But by the third day, the silence began to echo. By the fifth, it felt like a verdict. He rehearsed every word of the interview, in his mind replaying his answers, his posture, the tremor in his voice when Eleanor had recognized him. Maybe he'd seemed unprofessional. Maybe he'd leaned too hard into that past moment, hoping it would matter. Maybe it hadn't. And what had he really been expecting? That a good deed from 14 years ago would be enough to rewrite the brutal logic of adult life. The memories started to creep in, then an invited vivid. His mum, her hands trembling slightly as she filled out forms for Medicaid, her eyes always tired but never harsh. The time they'd gone a week eating ramen because the rent was due, the sound of the landlord's knuckles pounding on the door, and the funeral god, the funeral, rain again, and the crushing weight of a cheap black suit 2 sizes too small, and people telling him how strong he was, as if he had a choice. All of it knotted inside him, and by the 6th day, Jordan couldn't hold it back anymore. "You should stop waiting on this," Travis said bluntly, sitting on the couch, in his gym shorts, scrolling through job listings on his phone. "It's been almost a week. They're not calling." Jordan didn't answer, eyes fixed on the dark TV screen in front of him, seeing nothing. "I mean it, man," Travis continued. "I got a buddy at the distribution center in Brooklyn. They're hiring, good hours, decent pay. You could be working by Monday." "I didn't go through everything I went through to stack boxes," Jordan muttered, jaw clenched. "Yeah, well, what are you doing now?" "Living off my couch and eating my cereal." Travis stood up, not cruel, but fed up. "You act like the world owes you something just because you worked hard and didn't turn into an asshole. It doesn't. That's not how it works." Jordan stood too, heat rising to his face. "I never said the world owed me, but I'm not giving up just because it's hard. I've been broke my whole life, Travis. I've already lived at the bottom. I'm trying to do something more than just survive." Travis sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "And what if this is it, man? What if this is all there is? You keep waiting for someone to see you, but maybe no one's looking. Jordan didn't reply. He just walked out, slamming the door behind him and letting the stairwell swallow his rage. He walked the block 3 times in the dusk, the city lights blurring behind his tears. Maybe Travis was right. Maybe that little boy with the umbrella had been stupid to believe one good thing would matter. Maybe all his mother's lessons about kindness and quiet strength were fairy tales in a world that ran on power and connections. Across the city, Eleanor Brooks sat in her high-rise office, the skyline stretching behind her like a painting she no longer had time to admire. The candidate reports lay in front of her, bullet points, performance metrics, references. Jordan's file sat neatly on top. Solid experience, resilient, no red flags. But then there was the other candidate: private school pedigree, Ivy League credentials, glowing letters from CEOs whose names carried weight. The higher-ups had already nudged her once. He's well connected, they'd said. Code for hire him and keep the wheels greased. They didn't say don't hire Jordan, but they didn't have to. Still, Eleanor couldn't let go of what she'd felt in that interview room. She remembered the rain that day. So many years ago, the sheer terror of trying to cross a street while cars sprayed water in all directions and not a single adult stopped. Not one, just a child. A boy with holes in his shoes and kindness in his eyes. No camera, no crowd, just instinct and compassion. She'd never forgotten it, even if she hadn't recognized him at first. And when he'd looked at her in that conference room, older, worn, but still kind, something in her heart had shifted. She thought of her husband then, long gone now, a public school teacher who'd lived on passion and principle more than paychecks. He used to say things that sounded like hope, dressed in worn-out flannel. What the world needs isn't more money, it's more Jordans. She hadn't understood what he meant until she met one, a boy who gave without asking, a man who kept standing even when life gave him every reason to fall. She closed the file and leaned back, the city glittering behind her. HR politics were ruthless. Decisions like this weren't supposed to be personal. But wasn't the whole point of her job to find talent that couldn't be taught? That quiet strength, that humility, that rare, impossible resilience. She could see it in him. Still, the clock ticked, and emails piled up. She hadn't decided, not fully. The practical world demanded connections, polish, guarantees. But the part of her that still believed in goodness, in long-forgotten rainy afternoons and boys with umbrellas, knew what was right. Back in Brooklyn, Jordan stood beneath a flickering street lamp, hands in his pockets, thinking about his mother. He could almost hear her voice, soft and steady, cutting through the noise. Be kind, even when no one's watching. He swallowed hard. Maybe she was wrong. Or maybe kindness wasn't about reward at all. Maybe it was about who you chose to be when everything else fell apart. He walked home slowly, the cold biting at his skin, his future hanging in the silence of an unanswered call. The call came just after noon on a grey Thursday, when Jordan had finally stopped expecting it. He answered on the first ring, heart already sinking as he heard the too polite voice on the other end. Someone from the recruiting team, not Eleanor. They thanked him for his time, said how impressed they were with his qualifications, and regretted to inform him they'd gone with another candidate. The kind of rejection crafted to sound gentle, but still landed like a punch to the gut. Jordan thanked them because what else could he say, and hung up. He sat on the edge of Travis's lumpy couch, staring at the scuffed floor, his hands trembling slightly in his lap. That was it. The dream, the fight, all of it gone in a 60-second phone call. He didn't speak when Travis came home, didn't move for a long while, just sat there, hollowed out, wondering what came next, wondering if there even was a next. Evening crept in, the light faded, and then, hours later, his phone buzzed again. He almost didn't answer. The number wasn't familiar. But something in him stirred, and he picked up. "Hello, Jordan," a voice said, steady, unmistakable. "It's Eleanor Brooks. I need you to come in." He stood before he knew why. Did something happen?" "I'll explain when you get here. I'll be waiting." Confused, barely daring to hope, Jordan threw on his blazer and bolted for the subway, heart pounding. The ride back to Creighton, and Hewitt felt like a fever dream, his reflection jittering in the dark window. The city rushing past in a blur of lights and shadows. He tried to keep his thoughts quiet, but they roared louder with every stop. Why now? Why her? When he arrived, the office was quiet, the lobby half-lit, most of the staff gone for the day. Eleanor met him at the elevator. No assistant, no pretense. She wore the same calm authority, but there was something softer in her eyes tonight. "Come with me," she said, and led him down a hallway he hadn't seen before, into a small boardroom with floor-to-ceiling windows and a single folder on the table. She closed the door behind them and turned to face him. "I fought for you," she said simply, "and I'm not sorry." Jordan blinked. I got a call earlier. They said they did," she said, "but that wasn't my call. The team went with the safer choice. The connected one." I disagreed. He couldn't speak, barely breathing. She stepped forward, picked up the folder, and handed it to him. "That's not just an offer for the analyst position. It's for a mentorship track role, reporting directly to me. Something I created. Something we need." His fingers trembled as he opened it, scanned the words, hardly able to process them. Salary, title, development path. It was real, more than he'd even hoped for. "I told you," she said, voice warm now, steady. "You'd do something special." One day, he looked up at her, throat tight, eyes glassy. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," she replied. Then, with a small, almost mischievous smile, she turned to the sleek cabinet behind her desk and pulled open the bottom drawer. From inside, she retrieved a small, weathered piece of paper, creased and faded with age. She unfolded it slowly and handed it to him. It was a drawing, his drawing. A stick-figure boy holding an umbrella over an old woman at a crosswalk. The cars sketched as angry boxes with jagged lines for headlights. In shaky, 12-year-old handwriting at the bottom, it read, "Be kind, even when no one's watching." "I found it in the grocery bag when I got home that night," she said quietly. "I kept it all these years." Jordan stared at it, his chest twisting. "I forgot I even put this in there." "I didn't," she said, "because that day reminded me that the world still has good people in it. And you reminded me again this week. The world doesn't reward quiet strength often enough, but I can." The silence between them was full, not awkward, not uncertain, full of everything that had gone unsaid. Jordan looked down at the offer, then at the drawing, then back at Eleanor. "I won't let you down," he said. "I know," she replied. "That's why I'm doing this." Outside, the city glowed in the dark, indifferent and unknowing. But in that small room above it all, something shifted, something earned, something kept, something finally beginning. Jordan's first week at Creighton and Hewitt felt like stepping into a different universe. Marble floors, polished conference rooms, and people who spoke in acronyms and strategy models. But he walked in each day with his shoulders squared and mind sharp, determined not to waste the chance he'd been given. Eleanor introduced him personally to department heads and senior partners, making it clear that he wasn't a charity. Casey was someone to watch. She didn't hover, but she didn't leave him to sink either. Their check-ins were brief but pointed, full of challenges and quiet encouragement. Under her guidance, Jordan found his footing faster than anyone expected. His ideas were bold but thoughtful, rooted in real experience, not just theory. When others hesitated to speak in meetings, Jordan offered clear solutions. He didn't try to impress, he just showed up fully, every time. Word spread quickly. He wasn't just someone Eleanor had vouched for, he was the real thing. But even as he rose through the ranks, getting his own desk, being looped into bigger projects, learning the rhythms of corporate life. Jordan never forgot where he came from. On his second paycheck, he quietly paid Travis's overdue rent, slipping the receipt onto the kitchen counter without a word. Travis found it the next morning and stared at it for a long time, saying nothing except, "Thanks, man," in a voice more grateful than his pride would allow. Jordan just nodded and went back to reviewing his notes for Monday's pitch. That weekend, Jordan took the train back to his old neighborhood, a duffel bag full of notebooks, pencils, and backpacks slung over his shoulder. The community center hadn't changed much, peeling paint, cracked tiles, but the kids inside were hungry for attention, for hope. He handed out supplies with no speech, no ceremony, just a quiet smile. Later, he sat with a group of boys who reminded him too much of himself at that age. Smart, guarded, tired of being overlooked. He told them not to wait for the world to notice them. "You start by noticing each other," he said. "You show up. You help when no one's watching." What began as a visit became a habit. Every Saturday, he returned to the center. He taught them how to interview, how to write a resume, how to carry themselves when people expected nothing. And slowly, they started to believe that maybe there was more for them. To dot at work, Jordan kept climbing. Not loudly, not with ego, but with the kind of steady excellence people couldn't ignore. Eleanor watched from a distance, proud but not surprised. She never mentioned the drawing again, never brought up the rainy day or the umbrella. She didn't have to. It lived in everything Jordan did, in every choice, every moment he reached back while still moving forward. Some days, Jordan would walk home late, the city lights flickering round him, and think about his mother. He'd hear her voice in the quiet, "Be kind," even when no one's watching. He understood now that kindness wasn't weakness. It wasn't naive. It was power, quiet, steady, transformative, and he had become living proof. One moment of kindness had changed the course of his life, and now he spent every day making sure that it wouldn't stop with him. The office was quiet, the hum of city traffic below muffled by thick glass and silence. Jordan stepped into Eleanor's office to drop off a final report, the glow from her desk lamp casting long shadows across the polished wood. She wasn't there, but something on her desk caught his eye. Simple black frame nestled beside a photo of a smiling man in a corduroy jacket. Inside the frame was the drawing, his drawing, the stick figures, the crooked little umbrella, the words written in a 12-year-old's hand, "Be kind, even when no one's watching." He stared at it for a long moment, the past folding gently into the present. Then he placed the report beside it, careful not to disturb anything, and turned to leave. At the door, he paused, hand on the frame, taking in the stillness. Outside, the city shimmered under the night sky, restless and alive. Far below, on the corner across the street, a young girl dropped her schoolbooks, papers fluttering out onto the sidewalk. Jordan watched as a man in a dark suit, briefcase in hand, bent down without hesitation, helping her gather the scattered pages. No audience, no reward, just a moment of quiet humanity. Jordan smiled, a warmth rising in his chest. He stepped into the hall and closed the door behind him, the soft click echoing in the stillness. He didn't need to say anything. The world had said enough. One small act can change a life. The world doesn't need more perfect people. It needs more kind ones.